Next is When We Were Kings, directed by Gast. This film is about the infamous Rumble in the Jungle heavyweight championship boxing match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, who met to fight in what was then the Republic of Zaire. Now, for someone who didn't grow up in such an era, this film is still just as enjoyable as it would be for someone who watched the original fight. Reason being is that it does a great job of providing you with enough context behind the events leading up to the fight, but also gives you a plethora of interesting behind the scenes interviews that really make it special, especially the ones with Muhammad Ali, who is obviously an entertaining personality. My dad loves this film because he remembers the original fight, so this is even more special to him, and I love this film because I can now relate with him about it.
Ali, Boomaye, Ali, Boomaye, Ali, Boomaye, Ali, Boomaye. That mean kill him.
Next is The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, directed by Seth Gordon. Following the release of the popular 1981 arcade game Donkey Kong, the film follows two individuals who are involved in a heated debate over who holds the high score record. And if all of that sounds kind of childish, then wait till you see this film. Like a couple of other films on this list, the best part comes from the characters' personalities and less from watching the challenges they undertake, even though they are still pretty amazing. My favourite persona is one of the disputed holders, Billy Mitchell, who just comes across as such a quirky and childish man-baby that it's really funny watching him explain why he thinks he's the real King of Kong. This film might drag along at times, but overall I still think it's a good film.
I often have people ask me what my handle is, what my three initials are. I mean, come on. I tell people, look at me. What do you think my three initials were? If you don't know, you're not looking hard enough.
TIE?
No. Which one was I wearing yesterday?
The American.
USA?
USA. So I had Latin friends and I had Canadian friends, and I always had to keep the Americans on top.
Next is Indie Game, the movie, directed by James Swirsky and Alyssa Narpajo. This is another film about a game with a difference in that it looks at the process of making games through the eyes of the independent game developers behind Super Meat Boy, Fez, and Braid. Again, you don't really need to know anything about the world of gaming to enjoy this film, because the movie focuses more on the people making these games rather than on how they actually make them. What's amazing about this film is that it really gives you a sense of appreciation for the people that work behind these games, the reasons why they go into the industry in the first place, and the sheer amount of effort they put into making something completely from scratch. Definitely an interesting and different perspective from what some consumers might usually be aware of.
Ether kind of based around my niece. She kind of reminded me of me because she didn't really seem to like to play with other kids, and she liked to just do things by herself and explore by herself, and she was very imaginative and she really liked monsters, so that whole thing like brought me back to when I was little, and I thought, how cool would it be to like make a game that could put other people inside my mind when I was like 5, 6, 7, and that was Ether.
Next is Senna, directed by Asif Kapadia. Following the life of Brazilian motor racing champion Ayrton Senna, the film focuses on his rise to becoming one of the greatest Formula 1 drivers in the history of the sport. What I loved most about this film is its unique presentation. Instead of relying on a narrator's commentary or heavy amount of interviews, the film employs numerous archival racetrack footage and even home video clips provided by Ayrton Senna's family. If you don't know who Ayrton Senna is, then I suggest going into this blind, because the experience will only be heightened. It's incredibly moving and one of my all-time favorite biographical documentaries.
That day, I suddenly realized that I was no longer driving it conscious, and I was in a different dimension for me. The circuit for me was a tunnel, which I was just going, and I realized I was well beyond my conscious understanding.
Next is Mistaken for Strangers, directed by Tom Berninger. The film revolves around the American indie rock band The National and the relationship between its lead singer Matt Berninger and his younger brother Tom, who documents the process of making a film about the band and his successful older brother. Now, I didn't know anything about the band going into it, and I still don't know too much about them, because this film isn't really about the band, but about being in the shadows of someone else's success. So even though there's some great behind the scenes footage for fans of the band, I love this film because of the brothers' relationship and quirky mannerisms of its director. At several times I thought the film was intentionally a mockumentary in the same light of something like This Is Spinal Tap, which makes the film even more hilarious that this is actually how odd and funny their relationship is. Plus, because he's the brother to the lead singer, you get to have access to some very interesting behind the scenes footage.
Say, I am not the National. The National is everybody's now. Say that. Actually, that's good. Just say it.
Okay, you don't think I sound like a total asshole?
Maybe I will say it. I will say it. Oh, national bombs everybody now. Nope, no.
Next is This Is Spinal Tap, directed and co-written by Rob Reiner. Now this is another movie about a band, except that the band doesn't actually exist, and even though I know it's not a documentary but rather a mockumentary, I still feel like adding it on this list because it parodies other rock documentaries. A lot of people know about this film, so it's not exactly underrated or unheard of, but I still want to include it just because how well this film holds up since its release back in 1984. It's such a great parody of 80s rock bands like Poison and rock documentaries in general because the jokes they make are hilarious and work even without the knowledge of what they're making fun of. And this is the only movie I give an 11 out of 10.
Because if you can see, the numbers all go to 11. Look, right across the board. 11, 11,
and most of
11,
the
and
amps go up to 10.
Exactly.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it? It's not 10. You see, most blokes, be playing at 10. You're on 10 here, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. You're on 10 on your guitar. Where can you go from there? Where?
Next is The Ambassador, directed by Mads Brugger. This is the same writer-director behind another film on this list, The Red Chapel, and boy does it again showcase just how ballsy he really is when it comes to filmmaking. In this film, he goes undercover to become a Liberian diplomat to the Central African Republic in order to expose the underworld of diamond trafficking that diplomats like him have enormous freedom and power to do so. It's kind of unbelievable the situations he gets himself involved with because he really goes all the way and commits himself to this character, and what he reveals are just as damaging, if not more, as something like Borat or Bruno. I love this Danish filmmaker and I really hope he continues making more films like this.
The best that you can hope for is to be arrested and go to jail and lose everything you've got. Yes. That's the best you can hope for. Yes. The worst you can hope for is that you end up dead in a ditch in Africa. Yes. I'm giving it to you on a plate.
Next is The Wolfpack, directed by Crystal Mosel. This is another documentary that makes you question how this could have happened because it documents the lives of 7 children who were raised and locked away in the confines of their parents' apartment in New York City. I know what you might be thinking, and no, thankfully this is not another Joseph Fritzl type of scenario. Rather, this is an interesting look at what can happen with a group of individuals who are completely excluded from the influence of the outside world, with the exception that they can only learn about the world around them through watching films. It's an unintentional psychological experiment that has some interesting results.
Oh man, I will never forgive your ass for this shit. This is some fucked up, repugnant shit. Jules, did you ever hear the philosophy that once a man admits he is wrong, he's forgiven for all his wrongdoings? You ever hear that? Get the fuck out of my face with that shit. Motherfucker who said that shit never had to pick up 80 pieces of brain on account of your dumb ass.
Next is It Might Get Loud, directed by Davis Guggenheim. Another rock documentary, but again different in that instead of following the musicians from the bands, it specifically takes a look at 3 rock guitarists from 3 different generations or eras of music history. The 3 here being Led Zeppelin's legendary guitarist Jimmy Page, U2's guitar effects virtuoso The Edge, and the guitarist from my favorite band The White Stripes, Jack White. Truthfully, I'd only recommend this film for people that like anything to do with rock music or guitar, because the music behind this film is really what carries it, and if you don't really like their music, you might not like the film. Don't get me wrong, there's still enough about these musicians to get you interested in their music, but I really love this film mainly because of all the 3 guitarists. This is an easy recommendation for anyone who likes rock music or plays guitar.
Who says you need to buy a guitar?
Thank you for the dance, wonderful pygmies.
And
I would like to end my speech with a quote from the famous American general, General Patton. General Patton said, "If you tell people where to go without explaining them how to do it, you will be amazed of the results."
Merci beaucoup. Next.